Good afternoon. It's Thursday, the 30th of November 2017, just after 1 o'clock. Welcome to UK Column News. I'm your host, Brian Gerrish. With me in the studio, Mike Robinson. And we are delighted to be joined today by Vanessa Beeley. Good news or not good news?
A bit of both. Janet Yellen, the head of the Fed, was talking yesterday. She said that, US debt really getting to levels that she's concerned about. She said our current debt-to-GDP ratio, about 75%, is not frightening, but it's also not low. It's the type of thing that should keep people awake at night. So a bit concerned about the amount of money that the US government is spending. But don't worry, because for everybody in Europe, it's fine, because the 2018 EU budget has been agreed, Brian. So this is fantastic. How much money are they going to spend? They sort of had planned for 160 billion for the coming year, but they're actually going to spend 144,681 million on various things.
And that'll be spent with no full audited accounts. I think we're into the 19th or the 20th year, I've lost track, but there has never been a single set of European accounts that have been signed off because nobody's brave enough, no accounting firm brave enough to sign them off.
Smart and inclusive, it's amazing what they're spending it on. Smart and inclusive growth. They're spending on sustainable growth. They're spending it on security and citizenship. Global Europe. So apparently the European Union has a global campaign as well as global Britain. They're spending just under 10 billion euros on administration. And they're spending 420 million euros on what they're describing as special instruments. Right. So right. I'm not sure whether that's some kind of robotic sex doll or not. I'm just not sure.
Well, it's the European Union, so I guess it probably is, Mike. Yeah.
Right, but slightly more serious news now, and this is the Globe and Mail. NATO Research Centre is a headline. NATO Research Centre sets sights on Canadian website over pro-Russian disinformation. They say in an upscale condo in the Old Montreal, owned by retired University of Ottawa professor, sits the headquarters of a website that is now in the sights of NATO's Strategic Communications Centre of Excellence, as it investigates, among other things, the online spread of pro-Russia propaganda and disinformation that props up the regime of President Bashar al-Assad in Syria. The website globalresearch.ca is ostensibly the online arm of the Centre for Research and Globalisation, which has the trappings of a think tank and styles some of its regular contributors as senior fellows. But it is the media that matters. Its online content and its amplification on social media form the core of its activities. The site has disseminated articles that claim that Assad regime was not behind the April chemical weapons attack that drew a punitive US missile strike, also suggesting it was a hoax and that the deadly nerve agent sarin was not used. But what once appeared to be a relatively harmless online refuge for conspiracy theorists is now seen by NATO's information warfare specialists as a link in a concerted effort to undermine the credibility of mainstream Western media, as well as the North American and European public's trust in government and public institutions. Global research is viewed by NATO's Strategic Communications Centre of Excellence, or STRATCOM, as playing a key accelerant role in helping popularize articles with little basis in fact that also happen to fit the narratives being pushed by the Kremlin in particular and the Assad regime. So what do you think of that?
I think that the powers that be, the global powers, are extremely frightened of the truth coming out in any form that it comes out. And if it's been global research that's been telling the truth, particularly about those key questions of chemical weapons use by Assad, they're very, very worried. We're going to see a bit more of this later in the news with what's happening in defence.
Absolutely. So the STRATCOM, or whatever it's called, this little think tank research organisation, isn't actually part of the command and control structure of NATO. It feeds, you might describe it as an intelligence gathering and an analysis centre, and it feeds information into NATO. But what about the Globe and Mail themselves? Well, good news, Brian, because they have joined the Trust Project. right? Which means that we can trust what they say, and everything they've said about global research must be true because they've joined the Trust Project. Just to remind you what that is, this is all about news with integrity, and this is becoming a kind of cartel of mainstream media who feel that they need to get together and try to do something about the disinformation that's being pushed out by all the alternative media sites that are being funded by Mr. Putin. So maybe I could bring Vanessa Beeley onto the program. Welcome to the program, Vanessa. How's your funding from Russia going?
Oh, you know, I wish. To be honest, any funding would be quite nice right now. But I mean, this is on a more serious note. I mean, this is insane. We're going so much deeper into the bunny hole than actually even I ever imagined. I mean, we're seeing now a call for Chinese media staff in the US to be designated foreign agents.
You've preempted me slightly. So let's just bring this on, because here we've got Heather Newert, who's from the State Department, saying, we're concerned by the recent charges of treason filed against 8 Uganda journalists of a local tabloid newspaper. We continue to support freedom of expression and freedom of the press as central elements of US foreign policy. And yet, as you say, US Congress has now decided that not only the Russians, but the Chinese state media need to register as foreign agents. I mean, where does this end?
Well, it doesn't end. And I mean, an interesting question to raise here is Israel not a foreign agent, or is that a little bit risque to say that? You know, is AIPAC not a foreign agent? Why are their media staff, which, let's face it, have infiltrated the majority of American media, why are they not being asked to declare themselves as foreign agents? So the target is basically nations who threaten US unipolarity. I mean, you know, it's so transparent. And actually, I just saw a comment on Twitter from Subrata Goswami from the Massachusetts Institute of Technology saying that a few years ago, he remembers that in the United States during protests and demonstrations, people were actually put in cages as part of crowd control, but they were allowed to make their statements from within the cages. I mean, if we're talking restriction here, and if we're talking dictatorship and press predatory organizations, then we have to be looking at the United States right now.
Absolutely. Now, as UK column viewers and listeners will know, you were in Geneva day before yesterday, giving a presentation to the Geneva Press Club. Let's just have a quick look at that.
On their website, the White Helmets state clearly that they are a neutral, impartial, humanitarian NGO with no official affiliation to any political or military actor, and they have a commitment to render services to any in need, regardless of their sect or political affiliation. However, the White Helmets are embedded exclusively in areas of Syria occupied by listed terrorist organizations, which include Nusra Front and ISIS, along with various associated moderate rebels such as Ara al-Sham and Nour al-Zinki. But all these groups and subgroups are responsible for carrying out ethnic cleansing pogroms and documented atrocities against the Syrian people.
So that's just a short clip from the video, Vanessa. But a large part of the theme of this presentation was about funding. So, before we get on to that, what was the general response of the audience?
The general response of the audience was silence, which was quite extraordinary, because actually before the event started, quite rightly, Guy Metton, who's the president of the Geneva Press Club, had come under serious pressure, first of all, to cancel the event, but then also attacked for his perceived pro-Russian views, his support, obviously, of, in inverted commas, pro-Assadist, illegitimate journalists, as pretty much how we were described. And so at the beginning, what he actually insisted upon was cutting down the time that we were speaking in order to allow for the greatest number of questions. But it was quite extraordinary because at the end of the 4 presentations, because Guy Metzon actually made a statement himself to begin the event, there was a resounding silence from the members of press in the room. Now, it's hard to it's only speculation to say why that happened, but my feeling is that they simply didn't want to ask questions which would then expand upon the evidence against the White Helmets. So the decision had been taken to avoid asking or responding, let's say, to the evidence that was presented, and to either say nothing or to bring it back to an argument that continued with the NATO-aligned narrative, i.e., bring it back to the sort of default position of President Assad being the all-time villain in the Syrian crisis, etc. So it was very interesting, let's say, the lack of reaction, the lack of questioning. I mean, you would think this was a press event, so you would think it was the perfect opportunity for them to come. And if I am nothing more than a conspiracy theorist, which of course they are claiming, why did they not simply discredit me by questioning the evidence that had been presented?
Well, we'll come on to that in a second.
I just wanted to say, Vanessa, that organised silence, and the silence you described has clearly been organised. This is censorship. Now, either those reporters have decided that they are going to impose the censorship. So they've met over a couple of cups of coffee and a few cigarettes and said, we're going to deal with this Vanessa Beeley. Let's not ask her any questions. That's possible. Or else it's come directly from their news organisations and journalists have actually been warned off asking questions. But it's censorship.
Yeah.
Well, look, just before we look a bit more at the reaction to what you did, let's just have a quick run through some of the evidence that you presented. We're starting off with the CSSF annual report. Who's the CSSF?
It's the Conflict Stability and Security Fund, which replaced what was called the conflict pool. So it's an over $1 billion a year fund that is contributed to by British or UK taxpayers, and it's run under a cloak of secrecy by Amber Rudd, who has been basically criticised for not making the fund much more transparent, i.e., it's very difficult to get information of who those funds are going to. Well,
it's interesting you say that, Vanessa, because I have been trying, as you know, for quite some time now to get the information about where Department for International Development and Foreign Office money is going to in Syria. And as you know, our new International Development Secretary of State, Ms. Penny Mordaunt, said a few days ago that we should trust that the money is going to the right places, that we can trust that it's going to the right places. She's going to be much more transparent about where the money's going to. So I wrote to her last week and asked, well, now that you've said that, surely you could now release the information that I've asked for. Well, she didn't reply to me. She passed it across to the public inquiry team, who replied to me by saying no. So basically, there's absolutely no transparency in this whatsoever.
No, none. Absolutely right. And you're not the only one to have asked similar questions through the Freedom of Information, and pretty much everyone has had the same answer, which is yes, we are funding the White Helmets, for example, but no, we're not going to give you any information on it. I mean, that's extraordinary.
So we've got a cycle here.
Yeah. So if you go from, as I said, the CSSF, the Conflict Stability and Security Fund, the Foreign and Commonwealth Office. Now, thanks to Khaled Escaif, the Syrian journalist who worked independently inside Aleppo to go through the remnants of the White Helmet centers, the East Aleppo councils, the Nusra Front centers, and the Free Syria police centers. If you remember, we did a program on them last year. He found 2 documents in Arabic headed with Adam Smith International and Integrity Global. When we investigated further and we translated those documents, we discovered that there is Foreign and Commonwealth Office funds and financing basically going through Adam Smith International Integrity Consulting to an outreach agent called Tamkeen, the Tamkeen project inside Syria. And Tamkeen is responsible for the establishment of local councils, i.e. shadow state constructs, in terrorist-held areas, in particular in East Aleppo and in Idlib. But East Aleppo, of course, was occupied by Nusra Front al-Qaeda-led militant and extremist factions backed by the West, as is Idlib. Idlib is predominantly Nusra Front controlled. So if we then follow the funding through, so it goes to the East Aleppo Council. The East Aleppo Council, as I demonstrated in my talk, is made up of a number of terrorist faction leaders. But the East Aleppo Council is also connected in, through its leadership, to the White Helmets. If you move on the slides, I can sort of explain that a little bit more clearly. So here, for example, you'll see a White Helmet jacket that was found in one of the White Helmet combined with Nusra Front centers in Bab el-Narab in East Aleppo. And here you'll see clearly the East Aleppo Council logo on the sleeve of that White Helmet jacket. So just to recap, at this point, through questions from Baroness Caroline Cox, we know that the Foreign and Commonwealth, the FCO, has provided almost £200 million in the last 3 years to the euphemistically called Syrian opposition, which has gone through Adam Smith and Integrity to Tamkeen to the East Aleppo Council, which is connected, as you can see very clearly, to the White Helmets. Adam Smith, very quickly, I will be finishing off an article that will be up at 21st Century Wire today. Adam Smith have themselves gone through various corruption cases for having undue influence in the British government to receive funding. Despite these scandals regarding Adam Smith, throughout 2017, they have continued to be financed to receive funds from the FCO. So this has to raise a big question over the legitimacy of those funds and who they're going to, even without the following slides and information.
Well, no problem. So it's been a common theme this week, Vanessa. Don't worry about it.
We've had a lot of dogs barking. Don't worry.
Yeah. So this is on screen at the moment. We've got Raja Dasgupta, who's a former employee of the Department for International Development, according to this. And he obtained confidential files showing where government planned to invest taxpayers' billions in foreign aid projects. He sent the information to his new bosses at Adam Smith International to help them with bids for a slice of lucrative Department for International Development contracts, such as £147 million for Congo. That's quite a statement. That looks like that has come from the Daily Mail. Is that correct?
That's come from the Daily Mail, but it's actually been covered by pretty much across all mainstream media. And this, I think, sort of blew up early. I'm trying to remember my dates now. Either the end of 2016 or early 2017. But then there has been further scandals later on in 2017. So it's ongoing. So if we here, what I've done is to blow up the picture that was on the infographic of the East Aleppo Council. Now, if we look at the guy sat in the middle, he's actually a member of Nour el-Din Zinki, and he was one of the actual torturers and beheaders of the 12-year-old Palestinian child, Abdullah Isa, in July 2016. So this, again, demonstrates, let's remember, East Aleppo Council connected to the White Helmets, going to terrorists. Then again, Abdulaziz Maghrabi, who through his own admission in an interview with Al Arabi media, admitted that he was a member of the Al-Tawhid Brigade, which was one of the early Qatari-funded Islamic extremist brigades that invaded Aleppo in 2012 and 2013. But here he's seen actually sitting or heading up a group of Ara al-Sham fighters and militants. Ara al-Sham is not officially in the US designated a terrorist group, but I was told yesterday it is actually now a terrorist group in Germany.
But this is okay because the BBC uses them for transport and security.
Yeah, yes, exactly. But Arar Sham form part of Fatah Sham, which is the army of conquest, which comprises Nusra Front, which is Al Qaeda, and Arar Sham. Here again, we see the White Helmets receiving an award from Arar Sham. But just to go back to Maghrabi for 1 second, he invaded East Aleppo as an armed militant backed by Qatar in 2012. But he was then, according to testimony and civilian testimony in East Aleppo, he then became a leader of Nusra Front. So at the time he was a leader of Nusra Front, he was elected as president of the East Aleppo Council, and he formed the White Helmets. So here again, so if we go back, we have the CSSF fund supplying millions to Adam Smith International, a corrupt intermediary, to Integrity Consulting, to Tamkeen Project, which then hands the finances over to a known terrorist, who then sets up the White Helmets with British UK funding, while still a terrorist. And just to give an example of Arar Sham in East Aleppo, this is the organization that we are effectively funding.
So this is a quick video. What are we looking at here?
Well, these are Arar Sham fighters. This is an Arar Sham video, and this is them preparing either to attack civilians in West Aleppo or to carry out an offensive against the Syrian Arab Army during their operation to liberate these areas from similar terrorists to these. And here we have Essa Jalul. Now, recently, an analyst, the Syrian War Blog, I think it's called, has produced a report showing 65 White Helmet members with allegiances to hardline terrorist organizations. He investigated over 200 accounts, and he said to me, these are the 65 of the most extreme, but all of the others still showed allegiance to various militant organizations inside Syria. The leadership of the White Helmets in Syria has been proven time and time again to be nothing more than terrorists. Essa Jalul is a team leader in Idlib. Here, from his own Facebook page, we've taken posts praising Arar Sham. If you look at the arrows that I've shown, the man in one of his photos is Dr. Zainuddin, who's a notorious extremist, both with Arar Sham and Nusra Front, so with Fatah Sham, the army of conquest. And here again, you'll see him in a celebration in the Hama countryside, welcoming back the terrorists from Daraya. And if you move on to the video, you will see, guess who else is with these terrorists. So here, with Al-Qaeda and with Arar Sham, with Sheikh Abdullah Muhaizini in the brown headgear here, who trains child suicide bombers inside Syria. He's Riyadh educated and funded. He has publicly called for funds to be sent to the militant and terrorist organizations. And here he is mingling quite happily with the White Helmet operatives. So, you know, it's hard to really understand what more evidence does there need to be to at least carry out an investigation into this organization?
Well, look, let's just briefly have a look at the sort of response that you've been getting on Twitter and so on since you spoke. And every single comment that I've seen, I have yet to see one that actually attacked what you've said. They're all attempting to attack you personally. So here's one. She'd fail the written test in the places I've worked, as her writing is peppered with linguistic errors. She might explain her hatred this might explain her hatred towards the MSF. It's quite amusing that he's complaining about your writing being peppered with linguistic errors, and his tweet has a linguistic error because he says she'd failed the written test as the places I've worked as her writing is. This doesn't make sense.
No, well, even when you were reading it, it didn't make sense.
Right.
I mean, you know, I don't know who this Tom Burgess Watson is, but it seems to be that he's just a media attack dog that they've set on to people on Twitter, because he's still going. I mean, he's been going for about 12 hours. I gave up in the end. I blocked him because he was just ridiculous. But no, he's not once responded to any requests for his response to the white helmet evidence. But nobody has. None of the journalists did in Geneva, and in their reports since the Geneva conference, not one of them has actually addressed the accusation.
Yeah. Well, perhaps we can help out, or at least our audience today can help out, Vanessa, because somebody says that that particular gentleman specialises in reports from Parisian nightclubs. So,
yes,
so there we are.
Okay, well, let's look at the response to the response. So this is from Carmen Ranieri, who says, well, we're not allowed to express our doubts regarding the mainstream media narrative without being brand-marked as sadists. People are tired of waiting 10 years or more until you journalists come up with the truth about wars, like in the case of Iraq, etc. So we started doing your job.
I mean, Carmen, actually, I have to say, Carmen and many others do such a fantastic job on helping myself and Ava Bartlett and so on with research behind the scenes. So a huge thank you to these people. But I have to also say that people like Carmen Ranieri, she's quite right. They are far better informed. They are far more principled. And they are far better investigative analysts than any of the journalists that are out there right now receiving three-figure salaries.
Yes, absolutely. Right. Okay. Well, Vanessa, stay with us. First of all, we're going to move on to Google here because Google is being sued. There's a website if you want to get the details. It's called Google You Owe Us. Do go and have a look at it. And they say, we believe that Google took millions of iPhone users' personal information illegally in 2011 and 2012. Google did this by bypassing default privacy settings on the iPhone Safari browser. This has been called, quotes, the Safari workaround. The workaround tracked internet browsing history, which Google then used to sell a targeted advertising service. Google makes huge amounts of money from selling targeted advertising. In 2016, they earned $80 billion from advertising alone. So what are they going to do about it? They said they've started a representative action against Google in the UK because we believe they abused the rights of iPhone users by taking their data unlawfully. A representative action is when a group of people affected by the same issue are represented by a single person making a claim. It's the UK's equivalent of a class action. Consumers can use such an action to hold large companies to account. Representative actions need representatives, such as ours is Richard Lloyd, so that's the guy who's bringing this case. If you were affected, you will automatically be part of the claim, and you do not need to take any further action. Richard Lloyd and the lawyers are taking care of the case. To see if you were affected by Google's actions, you can take some action on that website. And they say they ask, why does it matter? And they're saying our personal data is how Google makes money. When we use our phones, we trust that big companies like Google are using our data in a way that is fair and lawful. But in 2011-12, we believe Google tracked our internet searches and took our data illegally. Together, we can show that the world's biggest companies are not above the law. So I think we can probably, Brian, applaud that initiative. And hopefully they are successful. But I think I can think of a number of other areas where Google needs to be held to account.
Well, Google needs to be held to account. My governments need to be held to account. And the only people to do it are us. And by that, I don't mean UK column. I mean, it is the public at large. It has to be a great number of people starting to take the right action to bring individuals to account. And Vanessa, you've just taken us through the horrors of Syria. Of course, another conflict stirred up with the help of the British government, including financing. But of course, it's the British government standing on the world stage and lecturing other nations about how they conduct their individual affairs and their countries. I want to bring our viewers today back on the subject of this amazing lady, the Beechwood Children's Home whistleblower, Melanie Shaw. I've labelled this one vulnerable woman who must be crushed. It has become obvious that the British state, led of course by Conservative Prime Minister Theresa May, wants this child abuse survivor utterly crushed. On screen we've got people who were either involved in putting her in prison or stood by and did nothing so that she subsequently went to prison. And Melanie Shaw has now been in prison for some 18 months. I think we're approaching 18 months. She's been through a series of secret trials, public not present, journalists not present. Indeed, several occasions she wasn't even allowed into court, but had to give her evidence by video Skype link, which mysteriously failed at key moments. The British government, led by Theresa May, of course a Conservative, desperate to silence this lady because of what she knows about politicians abusing children, particularly in the Nottingham area, but also with links UK-wide. And it seems to us the agenda is to keep her in prison while the child abuse inquiry, if we believe that is taking place, but while that takes place. So where is Melanie at the moment? Well, she's been moved into this prison, HM prison style. This is a particularly unpleasant prison. It's very antiquated. It was a Victorian's orphanage. I think there's some irony in that, Mike. And what has been going on in this prison? Well, we're going to tell you, but before we get into the meat of it, let's have a look at what the state agents have been saying. This gentleman, Luke Sargent, is the Deputy Director of Custody Women's Estate. So he's the man apparently in charge of standards in women's prisons. He's had this to say with respect to Melanie. I can, however, give you assurance that Miss Shaw is being treated in accordance with prison rules and that she's being cared for in a safe and decent environment appropriate to her needs. Well, the reality is, the brutal reality is that Melanie Shaw has been kept in a nightie, making her fearful and vulnerable in the presence of sexual predatory inmates. She's been denied soap, basic toiletries. Mail has been withheld. She has no money. She's denied educational activities. In fact, she's denied all activities. And she remains on what's called a 3-man lockdown. This is where they may be men, they can be all men, excuse me, but warders, men and women, 3 of them follow her wherever she goes, to the toilet or to the shower. This is degrading treatment. This is Theresa May's Conservative Britain, which is lecturing President Assad on how to run his country. But have a look at what the prison governor has or hasn't done. Now, we have become aware that Melanie Shaw has not been told of the offences with which she's charged, nor has she been given her release date. And this is in direct contradiction to prison rules, which ensure that these key pieces of information are known by all prisoners, usually determined upon first arrival at the prison. Now, this has not happened. The lady on screen is the governor of HM Prison Style, Mahala McGuffey. And we know that at the moment, Melanie Shaw is in prison. She has no idea of the charges against her. She has no idea of the release date. And we say that psychological torture, aside from the brutal regime she's being subjected to. It is very clear that Melanie Shaw is being singled out amongst other prisoners for this treatment. And there can only be one answer, Mike. The state is terrified of the knowledge that Melanie Shaw has. This is her own words. I've been allowed 1 shower in 2 weeks. I have no toiletries. I have a cast iron bed in an empty room. I had no fluids again today. A warder tried to stop the nurse dispensing my medication. It's like something from a concentration camp. Well, I do hope that today we've got viewers from overseas. I do hope that we've got viewers from Afghanistan, Libya, Syria, for example, Iraq, because while the British government is lecturing you on how to run your internal affairs, this is the reality of Britain. And I'll just end this segment by putting up a picture of what I've called the privatised Gulag. This is Britain's prison system, or at least part of it. We have to remember, of course, that Britain's prisons are now being used to make profit for big business. This is pretty sick stuff, Mike, I think.
The hypocrisy is amazing, Vanessa.
I mean, it's actually mind-blowing. You know, one of the, and again, it's not about me, but one of the mainstay smears that they used against me leading up to the Geneva conference and even after the conference. So again, they didn't address the white helmets, but they went back to default position smear, which of course is we're pro-Assadist, we're pro-Russian, but also back to this torture concept that I'm endorsing, torture inside Syria, etc. And you know what I've said all along, we in the West have absolutely no right to any sort of moral superiority over any other country in this world. Torture should be condemned at all levels, but actually if you look at the top three or even the top four, I would put the US, the UK, Israel and Saudi Arabia up there. And so, you know, if any nation conducting torture both domestically and internationally should be accused and prosecuted and investigated and condemned, it is our own country, whether we're in the US or we're in the UK, because equally they support client states who are violating humanitarian law on every level in Saudi Arabia and in Israel. I mean, let's look what's happening in Yemen. The United Arab Emirates are conducting mass torture in the south of Yemen under the guardianship of the Saudi coalition, but of course that includes the US and the UK.
Yeah,
extraordinary.
Absolutely. Well, look, Alex Thompson's in the chat box and he's just said that France should be number 5 on that list. Well, that brings us very neatly into this because the Telegraph reporting here that Macron has announced a new EU plan to launch what's quoted as being concrete military action to rescue African migrants enslaved in Libya. Now, why is Libya in a state where African migrants could possibly be enslaved? Brian, could that be anything to do with the US, Britain and France? I think it probably has.
Proximity to Syria.
Well, but the key point is we destroyed the country in the first place. So this is why. Yeah, sorry, Vanessa.
Yeah, but I think also we have to be very, very careful, as I'm sure you're aware, of this entire sudden explosion of the slavery issue in Libya. I think it's purely another excuse for further intervention and military escalation inside Libya. Why? Because, you know, Egypt now is breaking ranks. It's basically it's starting to go against Israel. It's saying now that it is not supporting the movement of Palestinians from Gaza, for example, into the Sinai, which of course is again in direct contradiction to the Israeli agenda against Gaza. It is showing support for Syria. It's accepting trade partnerships with Russia. So I think we're seeing potentially a military buildup in Libya on the back of this slavery story, which of course is being promulgated by the usual suspects, the usual NGOs, the usual media, in order to try and, I think, to sort of secure Egypt and to lock down on any sort of revolutions within the ranks and support of what I call the peace bloc, which of course is Syria, Russia, Iran, China, now even Turkey is being brought in. So we're seeing a lot of maneuvering going on here, and so I don't think this is a genuine exposure of the slave issue inside Libya, because as you said, we created it, and it's been going on for a lot longer than something that's just blown up now.
Absolutely right. We did create it, and what's more, we're profiting out of it. It's, as I said before, it's the same business model as for the drugs trade. So you're right about that, everything you've said, but it goes a little bit further because, of course, this announcement has been made on the day that the European Union and the African Union are launching a joint. This is actually going to be a joint military and policing action. It goes hand in hand with this big conference that's going on between the EU and the African Union at the moment. But it doesn't just end there, because if we go to The Guardian, we find that Blackwater is now pitching a plan to get involved in this with a privatised police force. So what we're saying is European Union common defence policy action, now being the African Union being brought into that as well. So we're seeing the expansion of the EU southwards. And now we're seeing private interests getting involved in this as well. Brian, this is hugely dangerous.
It's immensely dangerous. What we're dealing, Mike, with psychopaths. We can now see that the key politicians, they're the front end puppets who are driving the policy. We're dealing with sociopaths and psychopaths. There can be no doubt about that. But of course, what do we need to focus on? We need to focus on the big money people who are pulling the strings of the politicians. We've got to deal with both issues, the politics and the money power that allows this globalist political agenda to advance so quickly. Right, well, let's come into defence then. Obviously, the EU is desperate to build up its unified military forces, and we'll just recap with two Plymouth-based MPs who have consistently denied that Britain's military forces are being hollowed out from the inside. They refuse to look at information even when it's front page in broadsheet newspapers. This is Gary Streeter and Johnny Mercer. And yesterday we were back on the case and asking the question, why wouldn't they tell the truth about what's happening to Britain's military and the formation of the EU unified military structure? Was it ignorance or by design? Well, we're pretty sure we know the answer, because the answer is fear. And it's finally broken surface, because here's the Mail with a really interesting headline. Top defence chiefs were summoned to the MOD for addressing down over leaks about military cuts fueling Tory rebellion. So here we've got it, Mike. This is fear-based, that now the truth's coming out and the top of the Tory system know it. There's all sorts of problems starting to happen. Now, according to this article, it was going to be Michael Fallon that summoned the defence chiefs, but of course he had to leave because he'd been doing a little bit of naughty knee touching, and he was replaced by this man, Gavin Williamson. And let's have a look at what he said. He said he's taking the opportunity to look at all the work that's been done and making my own judgment on this. I've always seen 2% as base, not a ceiling. Now, this man was under huge pressure in the dispatch box, people asking him about the military cuts. That's the best he could say. I've interpreted it for the audience. I've been made Defence Secretary, but don't really know what's going on. But I'm going to try and find out what is going on, and then I'll think of something to do.
Good stuff.
So remember that this is the so-called baby-faced assassin, as he was called, former chief whip. This is the man who knows all the dirty secrets about the Tory party. Do you think a backbencher is going to cross this man by telling the truth on defence, Mike?
Did he have his tarantula in front of him as he said this?
Well, that tarantula has frightened a lot of staff inside Westminster. So this is a pretty brutal man. He knows all the dirty secrets. Gary Streeter, self-proclaimed Christian. He's part of the cross-party Christian group in Westminster. Gary Streeter's not brave enough to stand up to this man and tell the truth. But have a look at this. This is part of the article. This is not Gavin's exact words. This has come from a Ministry of Defence spokesman. There was too much stuff going on around that could only have come from this small group of people. No one is accusing the chiefs, the defence chiefs themselves, of leaking, but there are suggestions that some of the detail has found its way to the media via proxies. There was alarm at the levels of detail and private conversations that shouldn't have been made public. Now, this is fear, but I'm going to bring in this man. Here we go. Let's get to the heart of it. Tim Fortescue, Conservative whip, said to BBC Camera that when the dirty little politicians who've been abusing little boys came to the Tory whips, it was covered up so that the members would do as they were asked. This is blackmail, Mike.
Yeah.
Is it any wonder that we see Tory politicians too scared to speak out? Remember that, Melanie Shaw is suffering in that cell. This is what it's all about. Heath, child abuse, the engine of Westminster. And I think we'll end on that note. Vanessa, any closing remarks that you'd like to bring in?
No, I would just like to say that Guy Metton, who took such a principled and courageous stand in order to maintain free speech, liberty of expression at the Geneva Press Club, is still coming under serious attack, having allowed the event to go ahead. So please, would people write to the Geneva Press Club? You can find the email address very easily online. And please write in support of him. This man deserves it. Imagine if this event had successfully been cancelled. Imagine how that would have emboldened both the NATO-aligned media, but not only that, the terrorists inside Syria, the terrorists that are outside Syria that we know about. So he took an incredibly important stand for all of us, and he gave courage to other people that might have sort of dithered over taking such a stand. So please, please, please do everything you can. Write to him, email him, send him chocolate, send him flowers, whatever you want to do. But please just simply show appreciation for somebody that stood by his principles.
Vanessa, thank you very much. Very good advice there. And I'm going to say that is exactly the advice for people who say, what can they do for Melanie Shaw? The answer is write those letters. When Robert Greene was in prison, he was receiving thousands of letters a week. That was the boost to him, and he's done so much work since. If you want to support Melanie Shaw, write her those letters, because those letters are the lifeline to her while she's incarcerated in Theresa May's Gulag. That's it for UK Columns News today. If you like what we do, please donate or subscribe. We can only do it with your financial help. Thanks for joining us. Bye-bye.